The Great Hall on Nexus Prime was the largest room Sarah Chen had ever seen. Massive columns reached up to a ceiling so high it disappeared in shadows. Representatives from 47 different alien species sat in curved rows, all facing the single chair where she sat alone. Sarah kept her back straight and her face calm, even though her heart was beating fast. She had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 15 years. She had negotiated trade deals, settled disputes, and helped humanity find its place among the stars. Now she was here for the last time, and not as a friend. The charges against humanity echoed through the hall. The speaker was Prime Zarthek, a being made of living crystal whose voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Each word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Reckless expansion beyond approved boundaries, Zarthek announced. Illegal sharing of advanced technology with primitive species. Violation of the sacred territories. Disruption of the established galactic order. Sarah wanted to laugh, but she kept quiet. The real crime was much simpler than those fancy words. Humanity had grown too fast. In just 300 years since first contact, humans had built colonies in 12 star systems. They had created their own trade routes instead of using the Council's approved channels. Worst of all, they had shared technology with species the Council considered too primitive to have it. The Cathani had been struggling with disease on their homeworld for centuries. Human doctors had taught them about genetic medicine and saved millions of lives. The Vorthak were slowly dying as their sun grew dim. Human engineers had shown them how to build fusion reactors to keep their cities warm. The Council called this contamination. Sarah called it being decent neighbors. The species known as humanity has shown complete disregard for galactic law, Zarthek continued. His crystal body glowed brighter as he spoke, casting rainbow patterns on the walls. They spread across space like a plague, taking what they want and giving dangerous knowledge to those who should not have it. Around the hall, alien heads nodded in agreement. The Zilani with their tentacled faces, the bird-like Kethmor with their bright feathers, the slug-like hegemony representatives in their breathing tanks. All of them had voted the same way. All of them wanted humanity gone. Sarah finally stood up. The hall fell silent. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice carrying clearly in the vast space. Zarthek's glow dimmed slightly. The accused may speak before sentence is passed. Sarah looked around the hall, meeting as many alien eyes as she could. "You call us dangerous because we explore. You call us criminals because we help others. You say we break your laws, but your laws exist to keep everyone exactly where they are forever." Murmurs started around the hall, but Sarah kept talking. "For 10,000 years, you have ruled this galaxy. 10,000 years of the same species in the same places, doing the same things, following the same rules. Nothing changes. Nothing grows. Nothing gets better." She pointed at the Kethmor section. "Your people could have cured the Kethani plague 500 years ago. But you decided they hadn't earned the right to advanced medicine yet." The Kethmor representative's feathers ruffled in anger. But Sarah continued. "You could have saved the Vorthak homeworld. But fusion technology was too advanced for them. You watched entire worlds suffer because helping them would have upset your precious order." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "We helped them because it was right. Because when you have the power to stop suffering, you use it. Enough." Zarthek's voice boomed through the hall. "Your species' arrogance knows no bounds. This is exactly why you must be removed." Sarah smiled coldly. "Removed? You mean exiled. Go ahead and say it. You're throwing us out of the galaxy because we make you look bad." The alien representatives were talking loudly now, their various languages creating a chaos of sound. Zarthek raised one crystal arm and the hall fell silent again. "The Galactic Council has reached its decision," he announced. "The species known as humanity is hereby banished beyond the terminus barrier. You will leave Council space immediately. Any human found within our territory after the exile period will be destroyed. Any attempt to return will result in the complete annihilation of your species." Sarah had expected this, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the stomach. The terminus barrier marked the edge of known space, the border between the galaxy's inhabited systems and the empty void beyond. It was a death sentence disguised as mercy. "You have 30 standard days to gather your people and depart," Zarthek continued. "Your colonies will be abandoned. Your trade agreements are void. Your embassy is closed. Humanity is no longer welcome among the civilized species of this galaxy." Around the hall, Alien representatives watched Sarah with mixtures of satisfaction, pity, and in a few cases what might have been regret. The Kethani ambassador looked particularly sad. Their people owed their lives to human medicine, but they had still voted for exile. Fear of the council was stronger than gratitude. Sarah walked slowly toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the huge space. At the door, she turned back one last time. "You think you're getting rid of a problem?" she called out, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "But you're making the biggest mistake in galactic history. We came here as friends. We tried to work within your system. We offered partnership." She paused, looking directly at Zarthek. "You're sending us away to grow stronger in the dark. When we come back, it won't be a supplicants begging for a place at your table. You will not return," Zarthek said firmly. "The void beyond the barrier is empty, cold, lifeless. It will consume you." Sarah's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Prime Zarthek, you clearly don't know humans very well. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and the vacuum of space itself. We've turned deserts into gardens and built cities on dead moons." She straightened her shoulders. "Empty space doesn't scare us. It just gives us room to work." With that, she walked out of the Galactic Council chambers for the last time. 3 days later, Sarah's ship left Nexus Prime carrying the news of humanity's exile. As they passed through the station's defensive grid, her communications officer handed her a message pad. "Transmission from Earth, Ambassador," the young man said. "President Martinez wants to know how to respond to the exile order." Sarah thought for a long moment, then typed her reply. "Tell the president the council wants us gone. Tell him they've given us 30 days to leave their space forever, and tell him they're about to learn why that was the biggest mistake they could have made." She sent the message and settled back in her chair, watching the stars stream past the viewport. Somewhere beyond those points of light lay the terminus barrier and the empty void beyond. The council thought they were sending humanity to die in the cold darkness between galaxies. They had no idea what was waiting for them in that darkness. They had no idea what humanity could become when it had infinite space to grow and no rules to follow. Most importantly, they had no idea that empty space wasn't empty at all. It was full of possibilities. 50 years had passed since the day humanity disappeared beyond the terminus barrier. The Galactic Council had almost forgotten about them, which was exactly what they wanted. Trade routes that had once included human colonies now followed older, more traditional paths. The 12 systems humanity had colonized were slowly being settled by other species, their new inhabitants finding strange abandoned cities and empty space stations. On Nexus Prime, the council met less often and worried about smaller problems. Border disputes between the Zilani and Kethmore over mining rights. Arguments about trade tariffs. The usual political games that had been going on for thousands of years. Prime Zarthek often mentioned in speeches how much more peaceful the galaxy had become since the human problem was solved. But Captain Marcus Webb knew better. Marcus guided his small scout ship through the debris field that had once been Kepler Station, humanity's last official outpost before the exile. 50 years of cosmic radiation and micrometeor impacts had taken their toll on the wreckage. But Marcus could still read the story it told. The station hadn't been destroyed. It had been carefully stripped of everything useful. Hull plating had been cut away with precision tools. Reactor cores had been removed cleanly, leaving no dangerous radiation. Even the hydroponic gardens had been harvested, leaving only empty growing chambers behind. His people hadn't died here. They had packed up and moved on. Marcus had been born just after the exile, on one of the last human ships to leave Council space. He had grown up on stories of Earth and the colonies, of the time when humanity had walked openly among the stars. Now he was 35 years old and had never seen another human face. Until 3 months ago he had thought he was alone in the universe. Then the message had come. It was hidden in the cosmic background radiation, so subtle that only someone specifically looking for it would notice. A series of mathematical patterns that spelled out coordinates in the old human system, coordinates that led to this debris field, and from there, Marcus checked his instruments again. The trail was faint, but it was there. Traces of exotic matter that didn't exist in nature, energy signatures that suggested technology far beyond anything the Council possessed. The trail led away from the debris field toward the edge of the galaxy, toward the barrier itself. Marcus followed it for 3 days, his ship's sensors straining to detect the faint signals. On the 3rd day, the trail simply ended. His instruments showed nothing but empty space, the same cosmic void that stretched between galaxies. But the coordinates from the hidden message pointed directly to this spot. Marcus took a deep breath and transmitted a single word on the frequency the message had specified. Home. Space exploded around him. It wasn't an explosion in any normal sense. Reality seemed to fold in on itself, revealing something that had been hidden underneath. Where empty space had been moments before, a massive structure now hung in the void. It was beautiful and impossible, like someone had built a city out of solidified starlight. The space station was enormous, easily the size of a small moon. Thousands of ships moved between its docking bays, their designs unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. They looked almost organic, as if they had been grown rather than built. Energy fields that shifted and flowed like liquid connected different sections of the station, and in the center of it all was a sphere of pure light that hurt to look at directly. Marcus's communication system crackled to life. Unknown vessel, this is New Geneva Traffic Control. Please identify yourself and state your purpose. The voice was human. After 35 years of solitude, Marcus heard another human voice. This is Captain Marcus Webb, he managed to say through the tightness in his throat. I received a message. I'm looking for other humans. There was a pause, then a different voice came through the speakers. This one was older, female, with an accent Marcus didn't recognize. Welcome home, Captain Webb. This is Admiral Elena Vasquez. Please follow the guide beacons to Docking Bay 7. We have a lot to talk about. An hour later, Marcus stood in what had to be the strangest room he had ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of energy field that showed views of space from impossible angles. Stars moved overhead like slow fireworks, and in the distance he could see structures that his mind insisted couldn't exist. Admiral Vasquez didn't look quite human anymore. She was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to have a faint glow under the surface. Her eyes were larger than they should be and reflected light in ways that reminded Marcus of looking into deep water. When she moved, there was something fluid about it, as if she existed in more dimensions than the normal 3. 50 years, she said, settling into a chair that adjusted itself to her body without any visible controls. 50 years since the Council threw us into the void. They thought they were sending us to die. Marcus found his voice. What happened? Where did everyone go? I thought I was the only human left. Vasquez smiled, and her teeth were slightly too sharp. The exile was the best thing that ever happened to our species, Captain. The Council thought the void was empty. They were wrong. She gestured to the walls, and the energy fields showed new images. Vast structures floating in the darkness between galaxies. Ships that bent space around themselves. Cities built from crystallized time and machines that harvested energy from the cosmic background radiation itself. The void isn't empty, Vasquez continued. It's full of possibilities that the Council never imagined. Dimensions folded into spaces smaller than atoms. Energy states that exist in the gaps between reality. We had to evolve to survive out here. And evolution is something we've always been good at. Marcus stared at the images, trying to understand. How many of us are there? More than when we left, Vasquez said. Much more. The void doesn't follow the same rules as normal space. Time moves differently here. Space can be bigger on the inside than the outside. We've had 50 years to grow, but for some of our people, it's been centuries. She stood and walked to what Marcus assumed was a window, though it showed stars that definitely weren't in their usual positions. The Council wanted us gone because we were changing too fast for their comfort. They preferred their galaxy static and predictable. Her reflection in the strange window showed eyes that held depths, like looking into space itself. They gave us unlimited room to change and grow with no one watching. They created exactly what they were afraid of. Marcus felt a chill despite the warm air. What are you saying? Vasquez turned back to him, and for a moment her form seemed to flicker, as if she existed in several places at once. I'm saying the Council taught us a lesson they didn't intend to teach. They showed us that isolation and evolution create power. They showed us that the empty spaces between things are where the real possibilities live. She smiled again, and this time Marcus could see that she was no longer entirely human. They exiled us to make us disappear. Instead, they gave us time to become something they could never imagine. Outside the impossible window, ships moved through space in ways that violated physics. They folded distance, stepped sideways through dimensions and danced between the stars like living things. "We've been waiting," Vasquez said quietly. "Learning, growing, becoming. The Council thinks they solved their human problem 50 years ago." She looked at Marcus with eyes that held the darkness between galaxies. "They're about to discover that their human problem has just begun." Marcus felt the station shift around him, reality bending in ways his mind couldn't quite process. Whatever humanity had become in their exile, it was beyond anything the Council had feared when they voted to send them away. The void had not consumed them. They had consumed the void and made it part of themselves, and now they were ready to come home. The first sign that something had changed came when the Zilani trade convoy vanished near the Andromeda Drift 12. Ships carrying rare minerals to the inner world simply disappeared between one scheduled check-in and the next. Their final transmission mentioned strange objects appearing on their sensors, but the message cut off before they could describe what they saw. Captain Veltar of the Council Defense Force organized a search mission. They found the convoy 3 days later, drifting dead in space. All 12 ships were intact but completely powerless. Their reactors had been drained of energy so thoroughly that even the emergency backup systems were dark. The crews were alive but unconscious, and when they woke up, none of them could remember what had happened. The medical teams found something interesting in the crew's blood. Traces of an unknown compound that shouldn't exist, something that seemed to be both matter and energy at the same time. Dr. Kethmore, the Council's chief scientist, studied the samples for weeks without finding any explanation. 3 more convoys disappeared over the next month. Each time, the pattern was the same. Ships found drifting with their power completely gone and crews unconscious. Each time, the mysterious compound was found in the victim's blood. And each time, the survivors spoke of seeing impossible things in their dreams, ships that bent space around themselves, beings of light and shadow, voices speaking in languages that existed in more than 3 dimensions. Dr. Kethmore brought his findings to the Council, his bright feathers dulled with worry. "The technology used in these attacks is beyond our understanding," he reported to the assembled representatives. "The energy drain alone would require machines we cannot build. But the real concern is the compound we keep finding. It matches no known element or molecule. It shouldn't be able to exist in normal space." Prime Zarthek's crystal form glowed with irritation. "Pirates," he declared. "Some new species trying to make themselves feared. We will find them and deal with them as we always have." But Kethmore wasn't satisfied. Something about the attacks felt familiar, though he couldn't place what. The surgical precision of the energy drain, the way the ships were left intact but helpless, the strange consideration shown to the crews who could have been killed but were instead left sleeping. It reminded him of something. Something from 50 years ago. While the Council debated and planned, other things were happening throughout the galaxy. In hidden corners of hundreds of worlds, people who had lived quiet lives for decades suddenly became very busy. On the mining world of Kareth 7, Dr. James Morrison had spent 25 years studying rock formations and mineral deposits. His colleagues knew him as a dedicated but unremarkable scientist who kept to himself and published boring papers about geological processes. They had no idea that before the exile, he had been one of humanity's top experts in quantum physics and dimensional engineering. Morrison had been part of the Deep Cover program, volunteers who had hidden their true identities and spent decades blending into alien societies. The plan had been simple: establish human assets throughout Council space who could provide intelligence and support if humanity ever needed to return. The Council had been so eager to get rid of humans that they had never bothered to check how many were already living among them. For 25 years, Morrison had waited. He had filed his reports, studied his rocks, and kept his real equipment hidden in a cave system 50 kilometers from the main colony. Now the activation signal had finally come, transmitted through quantum channels the Council didn't know existed. It was time to go to work. Morrison descended into the caves using a mining survey as cover. Deep underground, past chambers that officially didn't exist, he found the equipment he had been maintaining for decades. Quantum field generators, dimensional resonance arrays, power systems that drew energy from the spaces between atoms themselves. It had taken him 6 months to smuggle all the components to Kareth 7, one piece at a time, hidden in legitimate research equipment. Another year to assemble everything and test it without being detected. The device he had built could tear a hole in space itself, creating a temporary gateway to anywhere in the universe. Morrison activated the portal and stepped back as reality split open in front of him. Through the gap in space, he could see another place entirely, a room that existed somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, where the laws of physics were more like suggestions. Admiral Elena Vasquez stepped through the portal, and Morrison had to suppress a gasp of shock. She had changed far more than he had expected. Her form flickered between human and something else, something that existed in more dimensions than his eyes could properly see. When she moved, space itself seemed to bend around her. "Hello, James," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the cave walls vibrate. "It's good to see a familiar face." "Admiral," Morrison managed. "You're different." Vasquez smiled, and for a moment her form stabilized into something more recognizably human. 50 years in the void changes you. We've learned to exist in spaces the Council never imagined. It's given us capabilities they don't understand. Over the next hour, more figures stepped through the portal. Some were recognizably human, though changed in subtle ways. Others were barely human at all, their forms shifting and flowing like living energy. All of them moved with the confidence of beings who had transcended the normal limits of matter and space. Phase 1 begins tonight, Vasquez explained to the assembled group. We have assets on 300 worlds throughout Council space. Each one has been building equipment like James's portal generator. Tonight we activate them all. Morrison felt a chill of excitement and fear. What's the objective? Reconnaissance, Vasquez replied. For 50 years the Council has forgotten we exist. They've grown comfortable in their static little galaxy. We need to know exactly how comfortable before we make our presence known. She gestured, and the air itself seemed to respond, forming a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots appeared on hundreds of worlds, marking the positions of human agents. Green lines connected them, showing communication networks that had operated undetected for decades. The Council thinks they understand power. Vasquez continued. They measure it in ships and weapons and energy output. They don't understand that real power comes from knowledge, from being where your enemy doesn't expect you, from existing in ways they can't comprehend. As the night progressed, reports began coming in from human agents across the galaxy. Portal generators activated on mining worlds and research stations. Dimensional scanning equipment deployed on trade routes and near military bases. Quantum communication arrays established connections that bypassed normal space entirely. Within hours, humanity had more intelligence about Council activities than the Council itself possessed. But the reconnaissance was just the beginning. On each world where agents operated, something else happened. Ships began disappearing. Convoys found themselves drained of power and their crews unconscious. Defense systems malfunctioned in ways that left no trace of sabotage. The attacks were precise, surgical, and impossible to trace. Energy was stolen so efficiently that affected systems simply stopped working. Personnel were left unharmed but unconscious, with strange compounds in their blood and dreams of impossible geometries. Dr. Kethmore studied the new incidents with growing alarm. The pattern was spreading across the galaxy, appearing simultaneously on dozens of worlds. The technology being used was clearly beyond anything in the Council's experience, but something about it nagged at him. Finally, he found what he was looking for in the old archives. A species profile filed 50 years ago and forgotten since. Humans. Known for rapid adaptation, technological innovation, and what the report called dangerous unpredictability. The report mentioned their exile beyond the terminus barrier, noting that the problem had been permanently resolved. But as Kethmore read the descriptions of human behavior patterns, everything clicked into place: the surgical precision, the consideration for alien life, the impossible technology, the way the attacks seemed designed to gather information rather than cause destruction. The humans were back. Kethmore reached for his communicator to alert the Council, then stopped. If he was right, if humanity had somehow survived 50 years in the void and developed technology this advanced, then alerting the Council might be the worst possible decision, because if humans could appear anywhere without warning, drain entire fleets of power, and exist in ways that violated known physics, then the galaxy had just become a very different place. and the Council was no longer in control of it. The attack on Nexus Prime began with something no one had ever seen before: silence. It was the morning of the quarterly Council Assembly, when representatives from all 47 member species gathered to discuss galactic affairs. Prime Zarthek was addressing the crowd about increased security measures following the mysterious ship disappearances, when reality itself seemed to hiccup. One moment, the main hangar bay was empty except for normal traffic control vessels. The next moment, a ship was simply there, having appeared inside the station without triggering a single alarm or defense system. The vessel was unlike anything in Council records. Its hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and looking at it too long made observers' eyes water as their brains tried to process geometry that shouldn't exist. The ship existed in normal space, but somehow also seemed to extend into dimensions that human perception couldn't properly grasp. Security teams rushed toward the hangar, but their energy weapons passed harmlessly through the ship's hull. Containment fields activated and then immediately shut down, their control systems reporting that there was nothing to contain. Scanners showed the ship was both there and not there, existing in a state that made their instruments give contradictory readings. From the impossible vessel emerged figures that had once been human. They moved through the station's corridors like ghosts, walking through walls when it suited them and existing in normal space when they chose to. Security barriers that could stop plasma blasts had no effect on beings who could step sideways through dimensions. Energy weapons aimed at them seemed to fire at empty air, even though the targets were clearly visible. Admiral Elena Vasquez led the group, though calling her Admiral seemed inadequate now. She had become something beyond rank or title, a being who existed in the spaces between reality. Her form shifted and flowed, sometimes appearing human, sometimes resembling pure energy, sometimes existing as a pattern of possibility that minds could barely comprehend. Behind her came others who had once been human, but were now something more. They had learned to exist in the void between galaxies, in spaces where normal physics broke down and consciousness could reshape reality through will alone. They were the void-touched, humanity's children who had grown up in emptiness and made it their home. The group moved through Nexus Prime without hurry. Security teams found their weapons useless and their barriers meaningless. Computer systems registered their passage but couldn't track their locations. They existed everywhere and nowhere, following paths that led through dimensions the Council had never discovered. In the Great Council Chamber, Prime Zarthek was trying to maintain order as reports flooded in from across the station. Intruders who couldn't be stopped. Technology that didn't behave according to any known laws. Ships appearing from nowhere and beings who walked through solid matter. Then Admiral Vasquez materialized directly in front of the speaker's podium. She didn't use doors or corridors. She simply stepped from whatever dimension she had been traveling through and stood in the center of the hall, regarding the assembled council representatives with eyes that held the depth of interstellar space. The hall fell completely silent. "Honorable representatives of the Galactic Council," Vasquez said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "We meet again." Zarthek's crystal form flared with recognition and fear. "Impossible. Your species was exiled. You were sent beyond the barrier to die." Vasquez smiled, and when she did, her form became more recognizably human for a moment. Death was certainly the intention. The void between galaxies is cold and empty, with no worlds to colonize and no resources to harvest. By your standards, it should have been the end of our story. She gestured, and the air around her began to show images. Vast structures floating in emptiness, cities built from crystallized space-time, ships that moved by convincing reality they were already at their destination. But emptiness, we discovered, is full of possibilities. The void isn't empty space. It's unformed potential, waiting for consciousness to give it shape. We learned to exist in the gaps between what is and what could be. We made homes in the spaces between atoms and found power in the silence between heartbeats. Around the hall, alien representatives stared in a mixture of fascination and terror. The images Vasquez was showing defied everything they thought they knew about physics and reality. "For 50 years we've grown in ways you never imagined," she continued. "We've transcended the limitations that bind species to planets and star systems. We've learned to exist as both matter and energy, to move through dimensions you don't know exist." Prime Zarthek managed to find his voice. "What do you want?" Vasquez's smile disappeared and her form became more imposing. existing in more dimensions simultaneously. We want to offer you a choice, the same choice you offered us 50 years ago. Suddenly, reports began flooding into the council chamber from across the galaxy. Human forces were appearing simultaneously on hundreds of worlds. Ships materialized in orbital defense platforms. Figures stepped through the walls of government buildings. Energy signatures appeared on planets where no technology should be able to function. The demonstrations were brief but comprehensive. On each world, the void touched showed their capabilities without causing permanent damage. Defense fleets found their ships responding to human commands instead of their own. Planetary communication networks carried messages in human languages. Energy weapons turned themselves off, their power simply disappearing into dimensions their creators had never discovered. Within 6 hours, every major military installation in council space had been visited by beings who could walk through their strongest defenses like they didn't exist. Your technology is impressive, Vasquez acknowledged as the reports continued to arrive. You've built weapons that can destroy planets and shields that can stop stars, but all of it operates within the 3 dimensions you understand. We exist in many more than 3. She raised her hand and every energy weapon in the council chamber simply stopped working. Not broken or damaged, but somehow convinced that they had never been designed to function in the first place. We could destroy you, she said simply. We could drain every reactor in council space, disable every ship, reduce your civilization to a pre-industrial state in a matter of hours. The technology gap between us now is greater than the gap between your ancestors and single-celled organisms. The hall was completely silent except for the soft sounds of alien breathing and the hum of life support systems. But destruction is crude, Vasquez continued. It's what you would do because you think in terms of conquest and dominion. We've learned to think in terms of possibility and growth. Her form shifted again, becoming more human and less threatening. 50 years ago you exiled us because we were changing too fast for your comfort. You preferred your galaxy static and predictable, so we're offering you the same choice you offered us. Adapt or be left behind. Prime Zarthek's glow had dimmed to barely a flicker. What are you proposing? Evolution, Vasquez replied. The council system is 10,000 years old and hasn't changed in all that time. You've kept species locked in the same roles, following the same rules, thinking the same thoughts. It's not government, it's stagnation. The images around her changed, showing new possibilities. Species working together on projects that spanned multiple dimensions. Technology that operated on the principle of helping, rather than controlling. Worlds where consciousness could shape reality and thoughts could become physical matter. We offer partnership, she said. Not conquest, not domination, but evolution into something greater than any of us could become alone. The void taught us that emptiness is potential, that isolation is opportunity, that what seems like ending is actually beginning. She looked directly at Zarthek. You sent us into the dark to die. Instead, you gave us room to become what we needed to be. Now we're offering to share what we learned. Around the hall, representatives were talking quietly among themselves. Some looked terrified, others fascinated. A few seemed to be considering the possibilities. The choice is yours, Vasquez concluded. You can continue as you always have, ruling over a static galaxy that never changes and never grows. Or you can join us in building something that has never existed before. A civilization based on possibility rather than control. She smiled one last time. You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely, this time. It really is your last chance. With that, she simply stepped sideways through dimensions and disappeared, leaving the council to face the most important decision in galactic history. 1 year after the Void Touched emerged from exile, the galaxy was completely different. The rigid hierarchy that had kept species in the same roles for 10,000 years was gone. The council's system of permanent rulers and unchanging territories had collapsed, replaced by something that would have been impossible under the old order. A government where advancement came through innovation and contribution rather than breeding or politics, not the new confederation. Council met in a station that existed partially in normal space and partially in the dimensional realm. Humanity had claimed as their own. Representatives from over 300 species gathered in chambers that could reshape themselves based on the needs of their occupants. Species that had been considered too primitive for council membership now sat alongside former rulers, all equal in their ability to contribute to the galaxy's future. Former Prime Zarthek stood before the Confederation Council as a petitioner, something that would have been unthinkable under the old system. His crystal form had lost the arrogant glow that had once made planets tremble. Instead, he appeared diminished, his light dim with what could only be called humility. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The being who had pronounced humanity's exile now stood where Ambassador Sarah Chen had once stood, asking for help instead of delivering judgment. "Honored representatives," Zarthek began, his voice no longer carrying the authority of absolute power, "I come before you to request aid for my people's colonies in the Outer Rim. Our mining operations are failing, and without them, 17 worlds face starvation. The problem was one that had been building for decades under Council rule. The Zartheki colonies existed solely to provide raw materials for their homeworld's luxury goods. When the Confederation's new economic system eliminated the artificial scarcity that had kept such arrangements profitable, the colonies found themselves without purpose or resources. Void Speaker Vasquez listened to the petition with the patience of someone who had learned to exist in multiple time streams simultaneously. She had changed even more in the year since the conquest, her form now partially translucent and existing in several dimensions at once. When she spoke, her words carried the authority of someone who had stared into infinity and convinced it to change its mind. "Your colonies will receive aid," she said, and Zarthek's relief was visible as his crystal matrix brightened slightly. "But understand the conditions. The old system where some worlds exist only to serve others is over. We will help your colonies become self-sufficient, but they will choose their own futures." Around the chamber, representatives from species that had once been enemies worked together on solutions. The bird-like Kethmore shared atmospheric processing technology with the aquatic hegemony. The Zelani offered mineral extraction techniques to species they had once conquered. Former council members found themselves learning from civilizations they had previously dismissed as worthless. The transformation hadn't been easy. Many species had resisted the changes, clinging to old hierarchies and familiar hatreds. Some had even attempted military action against the new order, only to discover that fighting beings who could exist in multiple dimensions was like trying to punch gravity itself. But resistance had faded as the benefits of the new system became clear. Scientific advancement that had been stagnant for millennia suddenly accelerated as species shared knowledge freely. Worlds that had been dying under council neglect found themselves renewed with technology previously reserved for the ruling classes. Trade flourished between civilizations that had been forbidden to interact under the old territorial restrictions. Dr. Kethmore, who had been the first to recognize humanity's return, now served as the Confederation's Minister of Scientific Development. His bright feathers had regained their vibrant colors as he worked on projects that would have been impossible under Council rule. "The applications for research partnerships continue to increase," he reported to the Assembly. "We now have joint projects involving species from all 7 galactic arms. The Quantum Archaeology Program has 43 participating civilizations. The Dimensional Engineering Initiative has requests from over 200 worlds." It was a revolution in more than just politics. The rigid scientific orthodoxy that had prevented most species from advancing beyond their assigned technological levels was gone. Knowledge flowed freely, creating innovations that combined different species' unique perspectives and capabilities. The Vorthak, whose homeworld had been slowly dying for centuries, now had fusion reactors built with human dimensional technology and Kethmore atmospheric engineering. The Kethani had not only cured their ancient plague, but had developed medical techniques that were being shared across the galaxy. Worlds that had been considered hopeless under Council rule were becoming centers of innovation and growth, but perhaps the most significant change was in humanity itself. The humans who had returned from exile were no longer entirely human in any traditional sense. They had evolved beyond the limitations of single-dimensional existence, becoming beings who could perceive and manipulate reality in ways that other species were only beginning to understand. Captain Marcus Webb, now serving as the Confederation's ambassador to newly contacted species, demonstrated this during his report to the Council. As he spoke, his form shifted between dimensions, showing the Assembly how consciousness could exist in multiple states simultaneously. "We've made contact with 17 new civilizations this quarter," he reported, his voice carrying harmonics that existed in mathematical rather than audible dimensions. Most are eager to join the Confederation once they understand that membership means growth, rather than subjugation. The new civilizations were discovering what the Council species had learned, that humanity's offer of partnership was genuine. The Void Touched had the power to dominate any species they encountered, but instead they shared knowledge and capabilities. They offered evolution rather than conquest, growth rather than submission. Some of the newly contacted species were primitive by galactic standards, barely having achieved spaceflight. Others possessed technologies that even the old Council had never imagined. Under the Confederation system, both were equally welcome and equally valuable. As the assembly continued, Vasquez found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. 50 years ago, humanity had been exiled as dangerous criminals whose only crime was helping their neighbors. The Council had sent them into the void, expecting them to disappear forever. Instead, exile had been humanity's graduation from a limited existence to something unprecedented. The void had taught them that emptiness was potential, that isolation was opportunity, that what seemed like ending was actually transformation. They had learned to exist in the spaces between things, to find power in possibility rather than possession. The galaxy Sarah Chen had been expelled from was gone, replaced by something that would have been impossible under the old system. Instead of rigid hierarchies based on ancient power, there was now fluid cooperation based on contribution. Instead of territories jealously guarded for millennia, there were shared projects that spanned multiple star systems. Instead of species locked into unchanging roles, there was constant evolution and growth. Young beings who had grown up under the new system couldn't imagine the old way of doing things. To them, the idea that species would be forbidden to share knowledge or help each other seemed as primitive as slavery. They thought in terms of possibilities rather than limitations, of cooperation rather than competition. As the assembly concluded and representatives began departing for their homeworlds, Vasquez remained behind to watch the stars beyond the station's impossible windows. Each point of light now represented potential rather than territory, questions rather than answers, journeys rather than destinations. The Council had exiled humanity because they feared change. They had preferred their galaxy static and predictable, with every species locked in its assigned place forever. In sending humanity away, they had hoped to preserve their ancient order for another 10,000 years. Instead, they had created the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history. The void hadn't consumed humanity. Humanity had embraced the void, learned its secrets, and returned as shepherds of a galaxy's rebirth. Exile hadn't been punishment. It had been preparation for becoming something greater than anyone had imagined possible. In the end, the Council's greatest fear had also been their greatest gift. They had wanted humanity to disappear into the empty darkness between galaxies. Instead, they had given humanity the infinite space needed to become what the galaxy had been waiting for all along. Not rulers or conquerors, but teachers of possibility itself. The void had claimed them, transformed them, and sent them back to claim the galaxy, not through force, but through the simple offer of something better than what had come before.